Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be discussing children and communion. Here at ACC, we often take communion when the children have gone upstairs to their activities, but there will be times when we take communion all together as a church family. And that raises the question about whether children who are unbaptized should be taking communion.
And we recognise that this is an issue where Christians take different views, and we want to be really clear at the outset of this video that we as elders consider this a secondary issue, which means that although it may be important, it is something that faithful Bible-believing Christians can disagree on, and that's okay.
Yeah, and because of that, as an eldership, as we've prayed and thought about this decision, we really felt that it's important for each family to make their own decision on what they feel they should be doing and how they should be leading their children. However, we don't want that to come from just tradition, what you've always done, or to be a thoughtless or sort of careless decision. We want that to be thought through, prayed through as a family. And that's why we've produced this video.
Yeah, the point of this video is to resource you to do that, both to understand for yourself what issues are at stake, and then to be able to pray and think about that decision for your children, and to be able to then talk to your children about that. So myself and Tim are going to lay out a summary, really, of why some Christians wouldn't let unbaptized children take communion and others would, and then finish, really, by some sort of practical concluding thoughts for our church family. So, Tim, perhaps you could start us off by explaining why some Christians would advocate that unbaptized children should be able to take communion with the church family.
For sure, I'll try and do a good job of this. But I think one of the main things with this view is it quite heavily leans on the idea of covenant.
Okay.
And particularly that in the Old Testament covenant, children were included within the family, within the practices and within the faith of the household, really.
Yeah.
And so this view sees that analogy between the way that in the Old Covenant, children were included in faith, included in practice, that same idea comes forward into the New Covenant. And so for Christian children, they're treated as almost part of the family household faith.
Yeah.
I think this view would think about scriptures in the New Testament. For example, Jesus says, doesn't he, let the little children come to me. So there's that idea that actually children, and he says, if you want to enter the kingdom, then you have faith like this. So there's that idea that children do have faith, and that's a real and active faith. And then I also think there's 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul talks about how through believing parents, children are made holy. Now, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into how, because it also talks about wives and husbands and that. But again, I think what it's trying to do is this idea that within a household, there's an authority, there's a faith that's held together. And because of that, children can be part of that, unbaptized children can be part of that household faith.
It communicates that sense of them being in and held within the faith of that parent, doesn't it?
And I think anyone who holds this view would say that can't exist forever. There's a time when actually a child needs to make that decision of faith for themselves in being baptized.
Yeah.
But until that point, and I think that kind of leads into one of the strengths of this view, which is many of us who are Christians with children, we do treat our children as if they're Christians. Yeah,
we raise them that way, don't we?
So we encourage them to pray.
Yeah.
We encourage them to take part in acts of faith and all of this kind of thing, to read their Bibles. We talk to them as if they can have that relationship with Jesus and the Spirit. And so I think that's a real strength of this point, this kind of view that actually acknowledges that and accepts this kind of idea that you're included in the faith until you either make a decision to be baptized or you make a personal decision that you don't want that. So it kind of defaults to inclusion and then moves towards kind of their own personal faith and their own decision to follow Jesus.
Is there any other things that you'd say are kind of important positives or reasons to Christians advocate for this view? I think there's the idea of belonging. And I think that idea that that the covenant, I think faith is quite messy.
I don't think, we all know, we've talked about this as in our baptism teaching, haven't we? That in the Bible at times you had faith followed by baptism, followed by spirit. Other times you had spirit followed by baptism, followed by whatever. So it isn't all sort of necessarily a linear progression. And I think that this view kind of emphasizes that. But it is held within the covenant. I do think there's some tensions.
Yeah, what's difficult for those who hold this view?
So I think the main tension of this view is, why would you allow a child to take communion but not be baptized?
So in the sense that a lot of the arguments you've just given for communion could also be used to advocate for child baptism, infant baptism.
I think so, and that's a tension, particularly if you want to hold the view here at Amblecote, because we've made the decision as elders that we don't baptise infants.
Yeah.
There are those that can hold that view, and as we said, it's a secondary issue, but here we don't, and so therefore, for people who want their children to take communion, they're going to have to live or work out why they're going to prevent them from being baptized. And often the reason we give for that is because we want the child to come to their own personal faith and to understand that decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. We'll talk a bit more about this later, but I still think within this view that within communion we would want children to understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
That it's not just an act or being silly, but actually I think for a child within this view to take communion would still need some understanding of what they're doing, taking it seriously, some level of teaching and practice. And probably, if I'm honest, doing it, as a family, a parent or carer, leading that child in that, so that it becomes kind of a serious, meaningful, faith-building act for that child. And what I hope with that view, you would be building the child to embrace the faith, to want to follow Jesus, and for communion to be part of that. But as I said, there is this tension of, well, if they're taking communion, it's a sacrament.
Yeah.
So for faith, for believers, so why not delay baptism until they're a bit older?
Why do these arguments carry weight here and carry less weight there, perhaps?
Exactly. Do you want to talk about the other view? So that's one view.
Yeah.
So tell us about the view, about not allowing or not preferring your child who's unbaptized to take communion.
Yeah, so I think those who would say communion is not for children unless they've been baptized would basically see that as following from two premises, really. And the first is that communion is for Christians.
Yeah.
And the second is that Christians should be baptized. And it's really the logical conclusion of holding those two beliefs. So perhaps it's helpful to look at each in turn.
Yeah.
Every time we do communion at Amblecote, we make a point of saying that communion is a sacrament for those who have chosen to follow Jesus, and we encourage those who aren't Christians to not take part. And we make that decision because that's what we believe communion is for. And we also believe that Christians should be baptized. Jesus commanded us to make disciples of all nations and then to baptize them, and that's the pattern that we see in the early church. And every time we do a baptism, we will explain that teaching. So if somebody claims to be a Christian but doesn't want to be baptized, we would usually see something has gone wrong there, and we'd work with that person to understand why they're saying that. And so if you combine those two convictions, that's where we get to the view that we shouldn't give unbaptized children communion. If they're too young to get baptized, then we would say that they're also too young to have communion, those who hold this view. And if they are old enough that they are personally following Jesus and they are, Christians for themselves and therefore should take communion, we'd then say, well, why not get baptized then? Yes. And so that's the way it goes, really. If they sort of have a faith that seems mature and independent enough to take communion, get baptized. And if they're not ready to get baptized, then also not ready to hold communion. And I think maybe the other thing to add is that might sound just theological.
Yeah.
But practically, in terms of forming that child's faith as well, advocates of this view would say, for children who grow up in a Christian home, there can be a lot of confusion between their own faith and their parents' faith. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's inevitable. But withholding communion actually can help the child to realize that there is a decision for them to make, and there is a time where they have to take that on for themselves. And in some way, having something that they can't do helps to keep that real for them, and stimulates them towards thinking about, is this just what mum and dad believe? But this view has its tensions as well.
Right, talk about some of the tensions.
So I think that the biggest tension is actually a reflection of what you talked about earlier, that for those who hold this view and don't let their children take communion, generally, they still raise their children to read the Bible and pray and develop a relationship with God and live as Christians, and would consider them little Christians, really. And so, although hopefully the rationale is clear that I've explained, there still is a felt tension, I think, of, in some ways you say, no, you can't take communion because you can only do that when you've really decided to follow Jesus for yourself.
Yes.
And yet, in other ways, we're raising them to really follow Jesus for themselves. And a bit like you said earlier, that's an understandable tension in terms of the development of that child's faith, but it does remain a tension, I think. So we're clear, aren't we, that neither view avoids all tension.
Certainly, and I think it's fair to say that when held well, both views are trying to do what's best in their own understanding of Scripture and teaching, what is best for raising children to come to faith, which is what we long for our children. Both are trying to do that
with integrity and all of that.
But those are the two views.
We really hope that's helpful. We've tried to be as clear as we can. There's obviously more to say, isn't there? And we would, if people want to dig in more, we're always available for conversation.
And it's worth saying, like we said before, the reason that we can, hold these two views is because they're held across the church, aren't they? Faithful, Bible-believing Christians hold both of these views. And so we are happy as elders for that to be held as a diverse thing amongst our congregation. But we do really encourage everybody with children to think about this and to be thoughtful in how they go about making that decision.
So practically, Tim, it's wonderful to advocate for a diverse range of views, but then how are we going to manage this on a Sunday when we're doing communion? And some families will decide one thing and other families another. So give us some help practically. What's this going to look like?
For sure. I think it's really important we think about that. I think the first thing is that we would encourage parents and carers to talk to their children about this. And I don't just mean sort of 3 minutes before we take communion.
Quick,
I mean,
it's happening.
Following this video, if you want to think, once you've kind of prayed about it, you can include your children in some of that discussion. But certainly, once you've made a decision, is to sit down with your children outside of a service and talk about what you're going to practice and some of the reasons why. And I think firstly that's important because both views require the child at their level of understanding to understand what's going on. That's really important. And the second reason I think is because it's important children don't only understand what's happening for them, but also they're going to be in a church family where there will be different views. And that can mean that children might not understand that. Those that are taking communion might feel like they've accomplished something better than the others. The ones that don't take communion might feel that they're less valued. So I think through those conversations, a parent or carer with their children can put those issues at ease, at rest, and
just
help
to
them
say,
understand.
Some families in the church will be doing different to us. That's okay, and talk them through that.
And I think if a child is at the sort of mature age to be able to take communion, then those conversations should be able to happen. I think if you don't feel that a child understands at all what is happening in communion, I think that would raise the question whether they should be taking it at all.
On either view.
On either view, I think. So I think the first thing I'd say is about talking to your children and having those decisions made really before you come to a service.
That's why we've done this video, so you can do that. Another thing to say is practically, when we lead communion with children in, we will give some guidance from the front, which will basically where we will say, please don't let your child take communion unless you've thought about this and talked it through with them. So we will give a prompt when children are in. And that's just for the good of the whole church family and you and your family, that even if you decide that you do want your children to take communion, you only do that after the kind of process that you've talked about. So hopefully we will help to prompt you. But then if you do decide that your children can take communion, I think the last thing we wanted to say is the children do remain your responsibility. Yeah. So in our services, when we're doing that, please ensure that your child is mature enough and informed enough to join in appropriately. And if you think that they might struggle in any way, then maybe just come with them, accompany them. But we're sort of giving responsibility to parents and want them to hold that for their own children, don't we?
For sure. So that's all we're going to say, really.
Yeah.
So we encourage you, please do think about this, pray about this, and come to a settled decision before God about what you would like to do with your children. We will say that we'd love to offer more support. So it's a short video. If you would like a longer conversation, if you want to go through some scriptures together, if you want to talk, me and Tim make ourselves available. The rest of the elders would love to chat about this. You can grab us or email in and we can have a longer talk about this, because it can be a difficult decision for some. But our main point is, please do think about it, pray about it, and come to a settled decision. So I think that's all we've got to say.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks, Tim.
So bless you all and see you soon.